Welcome back to G Fun Facts Online. Today we are bypassing the long intros and diving straight into the blistering heat of the Egyptian desert, a landscape that hides countless secrets but very few as truly confounding as the artifact buried deep within the mastaba of Sabu. Archaeologists officially call it the Schist Disk of Sabu. But to a rapidly growing community of engineers, fabricators, and alternative historians, it is known as the Naqada Rotor. This single, highly anomalous object has become the ultimate focal point of a fierce, ongoing debate concerning the true technological capabilities of our ancient ancestors. We are talking about an artifact dated to approximately 3100 to 3000 BC. In alternative history circles, you will often hear this rounded up to 5,300 years ago to emphasize its connection to the incredibly mysterious Naqada period of pre-dynastic Egypt. This timeline is what makes the object so incredibly disruptive. It is a piece of what looks like absolute precision engineering, carved from a delicate, brittle rock, appearing centuries before the wheel was supposedly even invented in Egypt. To understand why this disc is causing such a massive uproar, we have to go back to its discovery in a tomb of shadows. The story officially begins in January 1936, right at the edge of the plateau in North Saqqara. The renowned British Egyptologist Walter Bryan Emery was meticulously excavating tomb 3111. This was the final resting place of Prince Sabu, a high-ranking noble and the son of the pharaoh Anijib, the fifth king of Egypt's first dynasty. The tomb itself was a massive, complex structure consisting of 7 distinct chambers, and it was packed rich with the kinds of grave goods you would expect to accompany a first dynasty noble into the afterlife. There were stone vessels, meticulously crafted flint knives, and ornate ivory boxes. But in the exact center of the main burial chamber, smashed into fragments alongside the bones of the prince, lay an object that simply did not fit the technological narrative of the era. Once the pieces were gathered and carefully reassembled by the experts at the Cairo Museum, the object revealed itself to be a bowl, or at least, that is what it was officially labeled. But calling this thing a bowl is like calling a jet engine a very loud fan. It is a circular disc measuring approximately 61 centimeters or 24 inches in diameter, and it sits about 10 centimeters or 4 inches high at the center. It features a perfectly round central hub with a hole bored straight through it, which is connected to an outer rim by 3 curving shovel-like lobes that dramatically fold inward toward the center. When you look at it, it does not look like a vase. It does not look like a platter for dates and figs. It looks exactly like a steering wheel. It looks like a boat propeller. It looks identically like a highly engineered part from a modern centrifugal water pump. The first massive anomaly of the Naqada Rotor is what it is actually made of. The museum label identifies the material as schist, but modern geologists more accurately classify it as metasilt stone. This is a sedimentary rock that has undergone low-grade metamorphism. If you are an ancient stonemason, metasilt stone is an absolute nightmare to work with for 2 very specific reasons. First is its hardness. It is a relatively hard stone, and it is most certainly harder than the soft copper tools that were available to the Egyptians of the First Dynasty. Second, and more importantly, is its brittleness. Metasilt stone is notoriously fragile and has a severe structural tendency to flake, shear, and fracture along its natural geological layers. To carve a simple, thick, walled bowl from metasilt stone is an impressive feat of ancient craftsmanship. But to carve a complex, 3-dimensional, geometrically symmetrical shape with paper-thin curving blades from a single, solid block of this material is, according to modern stonemasons and machinists, bordering on the absolute impossible without the use of high-speed rotary tools. Think about the physics of carving for a moment. With a hand chisel and a mallet, every strike sends shockwaves through the stone. One slightly uneven slip of a copper chisel, one strike that is just a fraction of a millimeter too hard, and the delicate curving petals of this rock would instantly shatter along the cleavage planes. Yet, the disc shows absolutely no signs of being pieced together from separate parts. Other than the breakage caused by the collapse of the tomb roof over millennia, it was demonstrably carved from one solid, contiguous piece of stone. So why do engineers specifically refer to this as the Naqada Rotor? Because in the world of mechanical engineering, form dictates function, and the form of this artifact suggests one thing above all else: high-speed rotation. Let us break down the engineering arguments piece by piece. First, we have to look at its aerodynamic symmetry. The three lobes of the disc are spaced exactly 120 degrees apart with remarkable precision. They do not just sit flat, they curve gently in three-dimensional space. This is not done in the manner of typical ancient decorative art, which usually heavily favors flat surfaces or shallow relief carvings. Instead, these curves mimic a functional surface explicitly meant to interact with fluid dynamics, either a liquid or a gas. If you were to mount this disc and spin it, those lobes would act to physically scoop or propel air and water. This specific shape is known as an impeller. Designing an impeller that efficiently moves fluid without cavitating or destroying itself is mathematically complex even on modern drafting paper, let alone attempting to eyeball and carve it by hand from raw stone 5 millennia ago. Next, we have to examine the central hub. The disc features a perfectly circular central hub with a hole right in the middle, heavily resembling a socket for a drive shaft. This highly suggests the object was meant to be mounted on a rod and spun. If you are making a static decorative object, like a fruit bowl or an incense burner, a raised central tube with a through hole is entirely unnecessary. In fact, it dramatically complicates the carving process for no aesthetic gain. But in a machine part, a central shaft socket is the most essential feature of the entire design. Then, there is the issue of thinness and precision. The blades or lobes of the disc are incredibly thin, tapering delicately to an edge. In modern industrial machining, if you want to create thin fins on a metallic or stone rotor, you have to use high-speed CNC milling. Computer numerical control machines spin a cutting bit at tens of thousands of revolutions per minute. This extreme speed is required to gently shave away the material without causing the low-frequency vibrations that would instantly crack the thin fins. The idea that a first dynasty craftsman, squatting in the desert dust, using a blunt copper chisel and a stone hammer, could gently chip away this hard rock to create such thin, uniform, curved planes without snapping them off is incredibly difficult for modern fabricators to accept. It defies the practical reality of material science. Finally, we have the metric of balance. Although we obviously cannot take the original, priceless artifact out of the Cairo Museum and spin it on a motor, independent researchers have taken digital photogrammetry scans of the object and created exact 3D printed replicas. What they found is astonishing. The object is surprisingly well balanced. When it is mounted and spun, it stabilizes rather than wobbling wildly out of control. A handcrafted, decorative bowl simply does not require dynamic balance. But a high-speed rotor absolutely must be balanced, otherwise the centrifugal forces will tear it apart. The undeniable existence of the Naqada Rotor heavily fuels the controversial hypothesis that the pre-dynastic and early dynastic periods of Egypt were the inheritors of a lost technology. Proponents of this view, including researchers and alternative historians like Ben van Kerkwijk and Christopher Dunn, argue that our conventional timeline of human civilization is missing a massive chapter. They point to the broader context of the Naqada period, which spans from roughly 4000 to 3100 BC. If you look at the thousands of stone vessels recovered from this era, made of incredibly hard stones like diorite, granite, and porphyry, they are actually overwhelmingly superior in quality to the vessels made in later, supposedly more advanced Egyptian dynasties. These early vessels display perfectly hollowed-out interiors, flawlessly smooth surfaces, and incredibly thin walls that modern engineers argue would absolutely require advanced lathe technology to produce. The Naqada Rotor, in this alternative view, is not a ritual object representing a flower. It is a literal remnant, a surviving, physical piece of machinery from a previous civilization that understood mechanics, fluid dynamics, and machining far better than we give them credit for. Some of the most extreme theories go as far as to suggest the disk was a functional component of an ancient electrical generator, a high-volume water pump used for irrigation, or even a device for refining specific chemicals. There is a very popular experiment conducted by an amateur researcher who took a replica of the disk, submerged it in a tank of water, and spun it. The disk created a highly specific, highly efficient vortex, suggesting that if it was housed in a proper casing, it could serve as the core of a hyper-efficient ancient water pump. Another fascinating theory posits that the disk is what is known as a solvay disk, utilized in the chemical manufacturing of natron, the specific salt compound essential for the Egyptian mummification process. But as with all great mysteries of history, we must look at both sides of the coin. Mainstream Egyptologists and traditional archaeologists strongly dismiss the ancient machine hypothesis. They view it as anachronistic, which means projecting modern industrial forms and modern engineering biases onto ancient art. Their arguments are equally compelling and are deeply grounded in the established cultural and historical context of ancient Egypt. First, archaeologists openly admit the unknown function of the disk. They are not pretending to have all the answers. The object is officially classified simply as a tri-lobed bowl or an unknown vessel. However, the prevailing mainstream consensus leans heavily toward it being an elaborate incense burner or a specialized stand for a torch or oil lamp. In this context, the inward folding blades would serve a very practical, non-mechanical purpose to deflect air drafts away from the flame or to physically hold a central light structure securely in place. Second, we must consider the lotus motif. While the shape looks incredibly mechanical to our 21st century eyes, to an ancient Egyptian, it may have been a stylized abstraction of the lotus flower. The lotus was a profoundly important symbol in Egyptian religion, representing the sun, creation, and rebirth, because the flower closes and sinks underwater at night, only to rise and open again with the dawn. The three folded lobes of the schist disk could very well represent the folded petals of a lotus bud. In Egyptian funerary art, pure utility often took a back seat to deep religious symbolism. The artifact was found in a tomb, after all, a place completely dedicated to the spiritual journey of rebirth. Perhaps the strongest mainstream argument is the concept of skeuomorphism. A skeuomorph is a derivative object that retains non-functional ornamental design cues from structures that were necessary in the original. Think of the floppy disk save icon on your computer, or the fake stitching molded into a plastic car dashboard. It is highly possible that the schist disk is simply a stone copy of an object that was originally made out of a completely different, much more pliable material, like hammered copper, folded leather, or carved wood. The ancient Egyptians were incredibly famous for making stone copies of everyday objects. They carved stone ropes, stone baskets, and even entire stone houses for their tombs. Why? Because stone lasts forever. If Prince Sabu had a favorite copper oil lamp holder or a folding wooden stool, the craftsman would not bury the wood or thin metal that might eventually corrode or rot. They would commission a master artisan to recreate the object in eternal stone, so the prince could have it in the afterlife forever. If the original object was a folded copper lamp, the metasilt stone version would be a completely non-functional, eternal copy meant only for the grave. This brilliantly explains the bizarre shape without requiring ancient advanced machinery. Furthermore, mainstream archaeologists point out the complete absence of wear. The artifact, while broken by the collapsing tomb, does not show the microscopic rotational wear patterns, the scouring, or the heat stress one would mechanically expect to find on a machine part that was actively used in a high-speed grinder or an industrial pump. The smooth surface polish of the metasilt stone is entirely consistent with the high-quality, incredibly time-consuming hand abrasion techniques using simple sand and emery, which we know as a historical fact the ancient Egyptians had mastered. So where does that leave us? A mystery that spins on endlessly. Whether you look at this object and see a 5,300-year-old, hyper-advanced mechanical rotor, or a masterfully carved, spiritually significant incense burner, depends entirely on the philosophical lens through which you choose to view human history. To the modern engineer, the Naqada Rotor is the ultimate smoking gun. It is tangible, physical proof that the ancients possessed tools, knowledge, and an understanding of physics that vastly exceeded simple copper chisels and pounding stones. It represents a staggering capability to manipulate hard matter that was somehow lost to the sands of time, only to be painfully rediscovered thousands of years later during our own industrial revolution. But to the classic historian, it is the Schist Disk of Sabu, a breathtaking testament to the unparalleled patience, dedication, and sheer artistic skill of Egyptian master craftsmen. It is proof that with simple, primitive tools and an infinite amount of time, human hands can force unyielding stone into beautiful, complex shapes that seem to defy the very physical nature of the rock itself. Today, the artifact sits quietly behind glass in the Cairo Museum. It is largely ignored by the massive, noisy tour groups who are always rushing past it to see the gleaming gold of King Tut's mask. But for those who know its story, for those who stop to actually look at its impossible curves and its perfect symmetry, it remains a silent, stone riddle. It is either a high-tech rotor patiently waiting for the ancient machine that can finally spin it again, or it is a beautiful stone flower waiting for the forgotten god who can smell it. Thank you for tuning in to G Fun Facts Online. Keep questioning the past, and we will see you in the next deep dive.